on tonight? Basically, I'm going to go through my presentation. At the end, I'm happy to take questions from you all. So with that, I'll just go ahead and share my screen and get into it. All right, so Arming a New Navy is our newest temporary exhibit at the National Museum of the U.S. Navy, and it seeks to do two things. One, it offers an overview of the history of Building 76, the museum's current home, and it's a broader social history of the lives of people from DC neighborhoods who worked at the Washington Navy Yard. So I'd first like to talk about some of our motivations for coming up with this exhibit idea. A large part of it stemmed from some of the questions we received from the public. Whenever people visit the museum, if you've ever been, they often ask about the building's previous purposes. So one of the first things they notice are the large cranes. You can see it here hovering above the artifacts like this, like a big 5-inch gun from like a World War II era ship. And other aspects of the building that kind of hint at the past uses of the building. So our hope was that the exhibit would offer answers to some of these questions about the building and the experiences of people who worked at the Washington Navy Yard. All right, so this is our exhibit. Just want to kind of give you guys a picture of it so you can see what it looks like. So from left to right here, you have kind of a history of the building here. Here's kind of more of a people-centric aspect of the exhibit. This is kind of one of the cool parts here, designed by our graphics team. You can't really tell from this image, but it's a lenticular image. So depending on the angle that you look at it, you can see kind of this is the front entrance of the building. And there's kind of a historic image as well that kind of overlays over the top. Kind of gives you a chance to think about how the building looks different, how it looks still pretty much the same. On the right here, we have a ordnance wrench. And then this screen here is footage from the early 1950s with showing some of the work that happened in the factory back then. So you can see things in action. So there's a whole team that worked very hard to transform what began simply as an idea into a pretty cool exhibit. And if you haven't had a chance to see it, I hope you're able to swing by and check it out. All right, so let's start with the title exhibit, Arming a New Navy. What does that mean? So we're going to break it down. I'm going to tackle the new Navy part first. From 1775 through the 1870s, the U.S. Navy, with the exception of the Civil War, remained relatively small, and its main roles were defending the U.S. coast and protecting U.S. commerce. But by the 1880s, policymakers began believing that the old Navy was outdated and insufficient. Many questioned how the U.S. Navy and its state at the time could possibly match up against more advanced navies. So eventually a special board of naval officers convinced Congress to fund the construction of new cruisers. These ships were made of steel, they had electric lighting and breech loading guns. So this is one example right here, the USS Atlanta, circa 1886. At first, many envisioned these cruisers serving the same defensive purposes that I just mentioned, but others had different plans for this new Navy. The end of the 19th century saw the growth of an interdependent global economic system and increased competition for colonies among European powers. Many within the US had imperial interests of their own and feared being shut out of seagoing commerce. So in the 1880s and continuing into the 1890s and onward into the 20th century, prominent strategists and other policymakers began arguing the US should continue to expand the Navy so that it could challenge and one day surpass other navies to secure control of the sea and solidify the US's position as a leading maritime nation. So this is Rear Admiral Alfred Thayer Mahan, a big proponent of sea power and growing the Navy. As proponents began changing their minds about the size of the Navy and its purpose, they also began changing their ideas about how the Navy should fight and began embracing strategies, operations, and doctrine that focused more on offense and decisive engagements between large fleets of battleships, which takes us to the arming part of arming a new Navy. In the eyes of some, taking on the strongest navies in the world required more battleships with more firepower. All right, here's the USS Indiana, which is an example here. Let's see if I can drag that out of the way. There we go. In 1883, Congress established a special board to figure out how to arm this new Navy. The board spent about a year studying the problem before issuing their report. They ultimately recommended following a model that France was employing at the time, which involved purchasing steel, wood, and other products from private companies and establishing a government-run factory to use that material to produce weapons and ordnance for the Navy. Congress ultimately accepted the board's recommendation and established the Naval Gun Factory at the Washington Navy Yard in August 1886. But it took about 6 years of training workers and building the necessary facilities before the factory was in full operation. Building 76 was first erected in 1899 and functioned as the Naval Gun Factory's breech mechanism shop. All right, this is the current museum building. For those in the audience who are not firearms or weapons enthusiasts, the breech is the part of the gun near the rear of it that allowed sailors to load, seal, and fire naval guns. They were safer to use and faster than the muzzle loading guns that preceded them. If you've ever visited our museum, you probably noticed that the building is unlike many of the other museum buildings that you've probably seen before. As you can see, instead of artifacts, this building was once lined from wall to wall with industrial equipment. And in this picture on the right here, you can kind of see this crane that I showed you in the earlier picture. You can see it in action. They're hoisting some of the heavy components here. All right, I've spent a bit of time talking about Building 76 alone, but the breech mechanism shop was just one of a series of different shops and departments with unique functions, specialties, and tools that were housed in different buildings throughout the Washington Navy Yard. I really like both these images that I'm showing right now because they highlight the interconnectedness of various shops in the Naval Gun Factory. Right, so this is a map of the Washington Navy Yard's internal railway. And you can see this photo here on the left. This is the exterior of Building 76. You can see these railroad tracks that lead into it, into the front here. Producing the breech was just one part of a long and complex process of manufacturing naval weapons. As work in one shop or section of the yard finished, workers used the railway to move guns, equipment, and material from one part of the yard to another. I just mentioned the various shops and departments in the Navy Yard. Here are group photos of two of them here. Right, so on the left, we have the staff of the Navy Yard's Construction and Repair Department. And on the right, we have the Naval Gun Factory's Planning and Estimation Force around the World War I era. You can see here in the front row, you have women who often worked as clerks during these times. Some of the distinct identities or rivalries between the shops are reflected in the Navy Yard sports leagues where different departments played against each other. All right, so here you see the Navy Yard bowling league here, different shops. Here's the breech mechanism shop. They're in second place. Let's see if we can get over a little bit. All right. And then on the right here, you have a team called the Clofeps, which is one of the entertaining stories. The Clofeps team was actually like based on an acronym, and there was a bunch of different shops that blended together in one team. They couldn't decide on the name, so they decided on the name Clofeps, which is an acronym for all the different shops. So the C was for the cartridge case shop, the L was for the laboratory of foundry, forge, the electric shop, pattern, and steam shop. So it's a name they came up with. All right, and I wanted to point out one gentleman here, Joseph Paget, right here, the top left, second from the left. Worked for over 50 years as a mechanic at the Naval Gun Factory, including a stint in Building 76 in the breech mechanism shop. This photo is from the early 19-teens. Even though he was over 60 years of age at the time of this photo, he still enjoyed playing on his baseball team with all the young guys. So this is a good point to transition to talking about the experiences of people who worked in the Naval Gun Factory. Working long hours in an ordnance factory often meant working in very hazardous conditions. From the blazing infernos of forges, cranes with heavy equipment hovering above you, guns weighing thousands of pounds, ammunition, and no shortage of sharp objects to do your work, there is danger all around employees during their time on the clock. Sports, vacation, and other forms of recreation offered important relief for workers after long days at work. All right, you'll notice that I'm showing you kind of a lot of articles from historic DC newspapers. This is one of them here. The Washington Herald. This is from like the 19-teens or 1920s. They often had a lot of information about employees, different things that they were doing. So here you have one person that works in the breech mechanism shop that had just returned after a brief vacation, people that were getting married, people that were sick. So really kind of humanizes the workers for you. All right, most workers lived in nearby neighborhoods and either walked to or traveled there via streetcar. You can see one here in the background, and entered through the Latrobe Gate, which is pictured here. And some estimates from the 1920s indicate that around 25% of the people who lived in the nearby neighborhood of Barney Circle were employees at the Naval Gun Factory. All right, at this point, since I'm talking to the Capitol Hill Restoration Society, I thought it'd be interesting to talk about residents of the Capitol Hill neighborhood who actually worked at the Naval Gun Factory. And my personal research, I use a lot of census data, and I found it extremely useful for this exhibit as well. It offers a lot of information about people, where they lived, how they lived, where they worked, race, sex, age, family life, etc. These images are from the 1910 census, specifically information compiled from the Capitol Hill neighborhood of DC. Right, so in this top portion here, you can see two workers. So one right here at the top and right here. One of them is a 63-year-old German immigrant named John Schmidt. You find many different European immigrants working in a number of positions at the Naval Gun Factory during this period. Between 1881 and 1901, approximately 12 million immigrants entered the US, and almost 13 million entered between 1900 and 1914. So there's many people that mostly from Northwestern Europe that worked at the Naval Gun Factory in a variety of positions. All right, in the second section, this up here, you can see Thomas Richard here, a laborer at the Naval Gun Factory, who's a black man, 60 years of age. And you can see, so it might be a little difficult for you to see, but you can see here the kind of the racial diversity of this particular block of the neighborhood at this point, which is pretty interesting for 1910. All right, and another page here, we have a clerk here who lived in the same area, worked at the pension office, and you can see here he had 3 machinists that worked in the Navy Yard that were boarders at his home that paid rent. And then I borrowed this map from your website to kind of give you a sense of the block where that census data came from. So right here on East Capitol Street, kind of going up 3rd, 4th, and 5th. So right in this block is where these people lived. And I'm happy to provide those sheets to you if you need them afterwards. Right, so I just talked about machinists just a second ago. This is a pay certificate from a machinist named F.B. Whitney from November 1899, who worked in the Naval Gun Factory. Made about $80 per month, and likely on the higher ends in terms of salaries for employees. But let's take a moment to talk about, equity and who's actually able to secure these jobs. All right, so we know that this picture is from the early 1910s, but I haven't been able to determine the exact department that's photographed here. Obviously, we don't know the full context of this photo, but you can see here a group here and at least one black man sitting out front, right, with a broom in his hand. No one else is holding a broom or any other tool for that matter. What we do know is that this photo was taken right in the middle of the Jim Crow era. Most black workers, men and women, were not in skilled positions. and were relegated to performing menial labor at the Navy Yard because of racial discrimination. All right, this is an article from a prominent Black newspaper, the Baltimore Afro-American, from April 1941. And basically, it's reporting on a study that looked at the apprenticeship programs and employment trends in the Navy Yard and branded it one of the worst discriminators against Black workers in the national defense industry. In one instance, all but 38 of 497 white graduates of an apprenticeship program in DC secured jobs. Virtually none of the Black graduates secured jobs. This is in the face of the defense industry being in desperate need of skilled workers on the eve of World War II. Right. World War II had a profound impact on life at the Naval Gun Factory. The factory greatly increased its output, running 7 days a week, including night shifts, to respond to huge demands for weapons and ordnance. Now, at this point, the factory's mission has kind of shifted to focusing more on making anti-aircraft weapons and ammo rather than strictly naval guns. Many of the factory's workers and or their family members were drafted into the military. Both of these articles I'm showing you are from the Yard Log, a semi-monthly newspaper published for all people who worked at the Naval Gun Factory. One worker in Building 76, again, the building that currently houses the museum, learned that his son, Lieutenant Glenn B. Smith from the U.S. Marine Corps, was a victim of a fatal accident somewhere in the Pacific Theater of Operations. Right here at the bottom, which might be a little difficult to see with the icons in the way, see Staff Sergeant Grant S. Taylor and Sergeant Robert E. McVickers, both worked in Building 76, both in the presumably the Army. One was taken prisoner of war, the other one was MIA in Europe. All right, and then on the right here, you have PFC Robert Landis, an employee from a neighboring shop who fought with the 9th Infantry Division in North Africa, Italy, France, Belgium, Holland, and was killed in February 1945 in Germany. This is his picture here. And these are just two examples, but you find many articles like this during the World War II years. All right. The mass mobilization of World War II greatly expanded opportunities for women to take on skilled positions in the workplace, especially in the defense industry, at a time when the U.S. was in desperate need of war materials. Dating back to the 19th century, women had been employed in smaller numbers at the Washington Navy Yard, but they mainly worked as clerks or performed domestic work. This was especially the case for Black women. Juanita A. Gray, who's here on the right, initially worked as a domestic worker at the Washington Navy Yard, making about $20 per week. But after she graduated from an apprenticeship program, she went to making $45 per week, which was largely the result of Black activists pressuring Franklin Delano Roosevelt's administration to end discrimination in the defense industry. 1,400 women, including 300 Black women from the DC area, ultimately ended up working in skilled positions at the Naval Gun Factory. And it captured the admiration of a local newspaper. Here I want to point out, it might be difficult to see, but you can see women here kind of putting the caps on the end of these shells here. And they earned an extra 6 cents an hour for working with explosives. So really dangerous work and important work. World War II marked an all-time high in employment at the Naval Gun Factory. The workforce during this period reached 20,000 people that worked around the clock producing and repairing materials to support the U.S. war effort. But after World War II, work continued at the Naval Gun Factory for a time, but things began to change. First was the downsizing of the military. The U.S. Navy went from 3.4 million personnel and 1,200 major warships in 1945 to approximately 380,000 personnel and 237 major warships by 1950. The proliferation of nuclear weapons during the early Cold War led many to question the relevance of sea power and the need to spend a lot of money on a large navy. A lot of civilian and military leaders threw their support behind air power and the capability of the Air Force's long-range precision bombers to reach targets on land and destroy navies. Ultimately, these broader structural forces led to a decreased demand for naval weapons and ordnance, which led to a gradual reduction in operations in the workforce here at the Naval Gun Factory through the 1950s, until it eventually closed altogether in 1961. Right, so here again, that down. You can see the articles here. Some of them are written by two of them are written by employees, expressing their concerns about the closing of the factory and the economic distress it's going to cause workers and their families if they close it. Despite these kind of objections, they ended up closing it. And here is another picture of Building 76. And this is workers removing the industrial equipment from the building. Eventually, this building was converted into the Naval Historical Display Center, which opened to the public in 1963. Throughout the Naval Gun Factory's existence, there was a museum at the Navy Yard, but the artifacts were stored in different buildings. Now, this building that I'm showing right now, Building 76, has remained the home of the National Navy Museum ever since. Thank you for tuning in for my presentation. Hope that you can come by and see the actual exhibit and some of the other great displays we have at the museum. In the meantime, I invite you to check out the online component of the Army and New Navy exhibit on our website. And with that, I'm happy to take any questions that you have.
Thank you, Eddie. So if folks have questions, you can feel free to type them in the chat, or it might be easier just to unmute yourself. You can put your hand up if there are a lot of questions, or I had a question about, I don't know how much you know about, I know you showed the map with the houses on East Capitol Street. Do you have more knowledge about the people and where they lived in the community? Especially, I know we've done walking tours and that sort of thing with a lot of the African American community lived right close by. Do you have any more about that?
Yes, let me dig up the census data. I'll make sure to send you an email because a lot of times they have the house number. I'm not sure how the house numbers have changed over time, but it's usually like a house number and a street number or a street name that can give you kind of like a ballpark generally of where they are. And as I was saying, they identify race on the census, so it's pretty easy to identify those kind of historic areas and see how they've changed over time or remain the same over time. So definitely happy to share that what I've been able to find. There's lots of interesting stuff there, so for sure.
I have a question, a personal question actually. I was in the museum some years ago, considerable number of years ago, and there was a display there concerning an ancestor of mine, Commodore Matthew Fontaine-Maury, who was considered the founder of the science of oceanography, but who signed up with the Confederate Navy. I'm guessing that that display has been taken down, as has his statue in Richmond.
It has. He was part of the navigation exhibit. We've kind of used that space for other things. We had a display for the Olympia. I don't know if you're familiar with that story. When the ship in 1921 that brought the unknown soldier back from France, and actually our Navy art is kind of using that for a different exhibit. But yeah, yes, he's no longer there. That exhibit's down. So,
is there any history or knowledge of racial tensions between the white and the black workers?
I have not found any. I'm sure it's there. I've not found really big discussion of that necessarily. I imagine that kind of restricting them to some of these kind of menial labor was a way to kind of mitigate some of those tensions and kind of keep, frankly, some of the white workers happy. But definitely something I'd like to dig up a little bit more. Now there is a guy, this is kind of outside my time scope for this presentation, but Michael Shiner, a former enslaved worker, which was Dyer, I think you guys actually have on your website. Now he does talk a lot about his experience as an enslaved worker at the Navy Yard and some of the things that he has to deal with. So I'm absolutely certain it's there. So does that answer your question? Okay. All right, I saw, yes, to Elizabeth, the museum is open for in-person visits. We're open from 9 to 4 Monday through Friday and 10 to 4 on Saturday. So we're always happy for you to come by. So
If I wanted, oh wait, what time did you, I'm sorry to just butt in. What
no,
time
no,
did
it's
you
okay.
say it closed in the afternoon?
4 p.m.
So this is kind of, I guess, off topic, but if I wanted to bring a group of kids there, would we, it would be a small group, like maybe 10 kids or something. Could we just show up and walk in, or would we need to make an appointment?
You can show up and walk in with the kids, but if you want a tour, I can give you the information for our education specialist, and he can set that up for you. You'll need an appointment if you want a tour of the museum, but if you want to just bring the kids to walk around, that's completely fine.
Thank you.
There is actually a recognition of Michael Shiner at the health center, which used to be called the old Naval Hospital. And,
Okay.
and then Nancy may be able to talk in more detail about that, since she was helpful in setting that up.
Okay.
You're muted.
No, I'm live. I can hear you. But, yeah.
I was talking to Nancy actually.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Here she goes. Okay.
Nancy Metzger. Yes, Michael Shiner, as Dr. Valentine said, is just a wonderful character, both enslaved until we're not exactly sure, but then had a very long life as a free man here on the Hill and was very successful as a businessman. And it's certainly worth going to the Hill Center. It'll be a great introduction to a lot of people. There are several other Navy related people who have rooms named for them. And so it's a nice little history lesson with pictures and maps and things outside each room. So it's another, if you can't make it down to the Navy Museum, try the old Naval Hospital galleries. It's quite fascinating.
Thank you, Nancy and Norman. There's another question. The Berry was moored at the Naval Yard. It's gone now. Will there be a replacement? I assume that's a ship since it was moored.
I'm gonna say no to that second question. I'd have to double check on the history of that, to be honest with you. But to my knowledge, there is no plans to bring a replacement ship.
Are there other questions? Hearing none. Hearing none, I think we'll probably just wrap this up, but thank you so much. Eddie, this has been really interesting. I really didn't know much about the history of that, so thank you. Just to make a couple announcements, reminders for folks, we'll be doing another presentation on April 19th, Designing a Net Zero Energy Row house. And then again, as Elizabeth had said earlier, we'll be doing walking tours on March 26th and 27th. You can get tickets on the website. And then again, the Mother's Day house tour, which is the annual event, it's going to be like normal again, will be on May 7th and 8th. Tickets will be going on sale on the website on the second weekend in April. I think that's it, unless anybody has any other quick comments or anything. Thank you so much. This has been really, really interesting, like I said. So thank you. And everybody have a great rest of the evening. A lot of clapping. Thank you.